Dogs don't testify in courtrooms, but sometimes they remember the truth better than men do. Rain hammered the old courthouse windows hard enough to blur the town of Black Hollow into streaks of silver and shadow. Midnight had already passed, and Main Street sat empty beneath the pale glow of flickering traffic lights and tired neon signs buzzing against the storm. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low across the Oregon hills like artillery moving through clouds. The courthouse stood alone at the center of town, brick walls dark with rainwater, columns washed pale beneath security lights that hummed softly in the cold. And at the front steps, a German shepherd was digging like his life depended on it. His paws slammed against soaked earth with frantic determination, claws scraping mud and gravel beside the marble staircase. Rain drenched the thick sable fur along his back until it clung dark against his ribs, but the dog never stopped. He growled once, deep and guttural, then dug harder. Mud sprayed across the courthouse doors. His amber eyes stayed locked on the ground beneath the judge's window. Focused, certain, like he already knew something the rest of the town refused to see. Inside a battered Ford pickup parked across the street, Ethan Hale watched through rain-fogged glass with a tightening jaw. "Rex," he muttered quietly. The dog ignored him. Ethan killed the engine and stepped into the storm, boots splashing against puddles that reflected blue courthouse lights across the pavement. The cold wind cut through his dark canvas jacket instantly, carrying the scent of wet pine, old concrete, and distant chimney smoke from sleeping houses further uphill. At 38 years old, Ethan moved like a man whose body still remembered military discipline even after years away from uniform. Tall, broad-shouldered, weathered around the eyes. His short brown hair was damp within seconds beneath the rain, and the faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm caught the courthouse light as he crossed the street toward the dog. Rex suddenly stopped digging, completely still now. The shepherd stood frozen beside the hole, chest rising heavily, ears alert. Then slowly, he lowered his nose toward the mud again and released a quiet whine that barely reached above the storm. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had heard that sound before. Afghanistan, Kandahar province. The sound Rex made before uncovering buried explosives beneath collapsed roads. Before Marines stopped smiling and started praying. "Easy, buddy," Ethan whispered as he approached. But Rex backed away from the hole without taking his eyes off it. Ethan crouched slowly beside the torn earth. Rainwater pooled inside the shallow pit, washing thin rivers of mud downward across something pale beneath the surface. At first he thought it was stone. Then lightning flashed overhead, and for half a second, the object beneath the mud reflected silver. Ethan reached down carefully with trembling fingers and pulled it free. A small gold necklace. Delicate, child-sized. A tiny angel charm hung from the chain beside the letter M engraved into the metal. Ethan stared at it silently while rainwater rolled off his knuckles. Because 3 days earlier, the entire town had seen this necklace on the missing persons report for 9-year-old Madeline Pierce. Behind him, Rex let out another low growl. Not toward the courthouse. Toward someone standing beneath the streetlight across the road. Ethan slowly turned. A man in a dark sheriff's raincoat stood motionless beside a patrol SUV, face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Watching them. Watching the dog. The sheriff lifted one hand calmly in greeting. But Rex bared his teeth immediately. The sheriff remained beneath the flickering streetlight while rainwater streamed from the brim of his hat in slow, steady drops. Sheriff Daniel Nolan was the kind of man people trusted without thinking twice. Mid-50s. Tall. Silver hair trimmed clean above a weathered face that carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades shaking hands at church picnics and comforting families on their worst days. Even now, standing alone in the storm after midnight, he looked composed. Respectable. Safe. But Rex did not move closer. The German shepherd stood rigid beside Ethan, teeth barely visible now beneath curled lips, a low growl vibrating through his chest like distant thunder. Ethan felt it through the wet denim against his leg. "Easy," Ethan whispered softly, though his own pulse had started climbing. Nolan crossed the street slowly, polished boots splashing through shallow puddles. His patrol vehicle remained idling behind him, headlights cutting pale beams through the rain. "Late night for digging holes, huh?" the sheriff asked with a tired smile. His voice carried warm southern gravel, practiced and reassuring. Ethan straightened carefully, the gold necklace still resting in his palm. Rex found this. Nolan's expression changed almost too quickly to notice. Just a flicker, a pause behind the eyes. Then sympathy settled back over his features like nothing happened at all. "Lord," he murmured quietly. "That belongs to little Madeline." Rain tapped softly against the courthouse steps between them. Ethan studied the sheriff while Rex continued staring without blinking. "You know this area was searched already?" Nolan continued. "State police. Volunteers. K-9 teams too." Ethan glanced down toward the disturbed earth. "Then maybe they searched the wrong spot." Nolan looked toward the hole for several seconds before nodding once. "Maybe." Another flash of lightning rolled across the sky, illuminating the courthouse windows high above them. Old glass. Empty hallways. Silent chambers where no one had stood in years except clerks and judges during daylight hours. Yet something about the building suddenly felt awake. Watching. Ethan could feel it crawling beneath his skin the same way he used to feel danger before patrols overseas. Nolan stepped closer to Rex slowly, careful not to appear threatened. "Still the smartest dog in Oregon, I see." Rex answered with another growl. Nolan stopped immediately. "Funny," the sheriff said softly, almost to himself. "He used to like me." Ethan frowned slightly. "You knew Rex before Black Hollow?" Nolan nodded once. "Military conference down in San Diego about 8 years ago. You were still active duty military police back then. Dog almost tore my steak off the grill." A faint smile touched his face, but it faded quickly beneath the rain. Ethan barely remembered the event. Military life before his wife died often felt buried beneath fog now. Different lifetime. Different man. Nolan looked back toward the courthouse entrance. "You should head home. Storm is getting worse." Ethan slipped the necklace carefully into his jacket pocket. "You think this is connected to Madeline?" The sheriff hesitated, just long enough for Rex's ears to twitch sharply forward. "I think scared people see patterns where there are none," Nolan answered calmly. "Especially after loss." Ethan felt the words settle heavily between them. Not an accusation exactly, but close enough. The sheriff tipped his hat once, then turned toward his vehicle. Before climbing inside, he paused beside the driver's door without looking back. "You know," he said quietly over the rain, "sometimes dogs keep digging because they smell death that has already passed, not because danger is still here." Then he drove away into the storm. Rex remained frozen beside the courthouse steps long after the taillights disappeared. His amber eyes never left the dark second-floor window above the judge's chamber. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hale felt the old battlefield instinct returning. The feeling that somewhere nearby, someone was lying very carefully. The rain finally weakened sometime after 2 in the morning, fading into a cold mist that drifted through Black Hollow like cigarette smoke across old velvet. Ethan drove home in silence along the narrow mountain roads while Rex sat upright beside him in the passenger seat, unmoving except for the occasional twitch of his ears whenever headlights passed through the trees. The truck heater rattled weakly against the windshield fog, carrying the smell of wet wool, old leather, and pine needles trapped beneath muddy boots. Neither of them looked at the other. They did not need to. 15 minutes later, the truck rolled onto a gravel driveway at the edge of town, where an aging cabin overlooked the dark outline of Alder Lake. The place had once belonged to Ethan's grandfather, back before war and funerals and sleepless nights hollowed the world into something quieter. One porch light glowed weakly against the mist. The wood siding creaked softly in the wind. Home, at least in the loosest sense of the word. Ethan stepped inside first, hanging his soaked jacket near the door while Rex immediately crossed the cabin toward the stone fireplace. But instead of lying down like usual, the shepherd stopped halfway through the living room and stared toward the hallway. Alert again. Watching. Ethan noticed it instantly. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Rex did not bark. He simply stood there, muscles tense beneath damp fur. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward the narrow hallway leading to the back bedroom. Nothing moved. Only darkness. Yet the air suddenly felt different inside the cabin. Heavy somehow. Ethan reached for the pistol safe mounted beneath the kitchen counter out of habit more than fear. Old Marine instincts. Clear the room. Control the space. But before he could touch it, Rex relaxed slightly and lowered his head. False alarm. Or maybe memory. Ethan exhaled slowly and rubbed tired eyes with one hand. "You are starting to scare me too, buddy." Rex finally walked toward the fireplace and settled onto the rug with a low sigh. For a few moments, only silence filled the cabin. The ticking kitchen clock, wind brushing pine branches against the roof, water dripping from Ethan's jacket onto the hardwood floor. Then Ethan pulled the gold necklace from his pocket again. The tiny angel charm caught the firelight softly as he sat at the kitchen table beneath a dim, hanging lamp. Madeline Pierce, 9 years old, missing 3 days. Last seen leaving choir practice downtown. Ethan had read the flyers posted across gas stations and grocery stores all week. Small smile, blonde hair, green raincoat. The kind of child every town believes nothing bad could ever happen to. He turned the necklace slowly between his fingers. Something about it bothered him beyond the obvious. Not just because Rex found it buried outside the courthouse. Because the chain was clean. Too clean. No rust. No dirt trapped inside the clasp. Like it had not been underground very long at all. A sudden sound broke the silence. Click. Ethan froze. The noise came from the living room window facing the lake. Soft. Metallic. Rex lifted his head instantly, ears sharp. Another click followed. Ethan stood carefully and crossed the room without speaking. Outside, fog drifted low across the shoreline, while moonlight barely touched the water through heavy clouds. Empty. Quiet. Then he noticed it. Something resting on the porch railing. Ethan opened the front door slowly. Cold mountain air rushed inside, carrying the scent of cedar and rain-soaked earth. Sitting on the railing was a small battery lantern glowing faint yellow against the mist. Ethan frowned. He had never seen it before. Beneath the lantern sat a folded piece of paper held down by a sheriff's department badge. The badge resting beneath the lantern gleamed softly in the mountain fog, like something left behind by a ghost. Ethan picked it up carefully, turning it beneath the porch light while Rex stepped outside beside him without making a sound. Black Hollow Sheriff Department. Deputy Aaron Lyle. Ethan recognized the name immediately. Young deputy. 26 years old maybe. Newly married. The kind of polite small-town officer who still said sir to veterans at the grocery store. Ethan unfolded the damp paper beneath the badge. Only one sentence had been written across it in hurried black ink. She is not under the courthouse. The words sat crooked on the page as though whoever wrote them had been shaking. Ethan read the sentence twice while cold wind swept across the lake below the cabin. Rex sniffed the lantern carefully, then moved toward the edge of the porch where muddy footprints disappeared into darkness beyond the gravel driveway. Fresh prints. Large boots. Whoever delivered the message had only left minutes earlier. Ethan looked back toward the trees surrounding the property. Pine branches swayed slowly beneath drifting fog, their shadows stretching long across the wet ground. Nothing moved, but he could feel eyes somewhere out there. Watching the cabin. Watching the dog. Rex suddenly stiffened again. His ears rose high as he stared toward the forest line downhill near the road. Ethan followed his gaze and finally saw it. A vehicle parked silently between the trees with its headlights off, too far away to identify clearly through the mist. The engine started a second later. Then the vehicle disappeared down the mountain road without a sound except tires sliding softly over rainwater. Ethan's jaw tightened. Someone wanted us to find that note, he murmured. Rex remained focused on the empty road long after the taillights vanished. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low while Ethan spread the necklace, note, and badge across the kitchen table beneath warm yellow light. The clock on the microwave read 2:13 in pale green numbers. The exact time Rex disappeared every night for the past week. Ethan stared at the clock for several seconds before looking toward the dog. What have you been trying to tell me? Rex said nothing, of course. He only walked toward the back door and sat beside it quietly, waiting. Ethan frowned. You want to go back out there? The shepherd gave one sharp bark. Ethan rubbed tired hands across his face. Every rational part of him said wait until morning. Call the sheriff department. Turn over the badge anonymously. Stay out of trouble. But another part of him, the older part shaped by combat patrols and broken trust, already understood something dangerous was unfolding beneath Black Hollow's quiet little postcard surface. And somehow Rex had sensed it long before anyone else. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and heavy canvas coat from the wall hook beside the door. The moment he reached for the keys, Rex was already standing. Tail low. Focused. Ready. 20 minutes later, the truck rolled slowly through town beneath low-hanging fog that swallowed storefronts whole. Main Street looked abandoned at this hour except for the occasional diner sign flickering behind steamed windows. Ethan drove past the courthouse again. Dark now. Silent. Yet the muddy hole near the front stairs had already been filled completely. Fresh cement covered the ground where Rex had dug only hours earlier. Ethan slowed the truck immediately. "That was fast," he whispered. Rex let out a low growl beside him. Ethan parked across the street and studied the courthouse through the windshield. Second-floor judge's chamber. One light glowed faintly behind drawn blinds. Someone was inside. Then suddenly the silhouette moved across the window. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked unmistakably like a sheriff's hat. The light inside the judge's chamber vanished almost the moment Ethan noticed the silhouette. 1 second it stood behind the blinds. The next, darkness swallowed the entire second floor again. Rainwater slid slowly down the courthouse windows while the old building settled back into silence. Rex growled low in his throat, eyes fixed upward without blinking. Ethan stayed motionless behind the steering wheel, fingers tightening around the flashlight resting in his lap. Something about the timing felt wrong. Too fast. Like whoever stood inside already knew they were being watched. "Stay here," Ethan whispered. Rex immediately turned toward him, ears rising sharply in protest. "I mean it." The shepherd let out a frustrated huff, but remained inside the truck as Ethan stepped into the cold pre-dawn air. Fog drifted low across Main Street, wrapping itself around benches, parking meters, and silent storefronts until Black Hollow barely looked real anymore. The courthouse steps glistened wet beneath security lights. Ethan crossed the street carefully, boots echoing softly against slick pavement. Up close, the fresh concrete patch looked even stranger. Still damp, still smooth. Whoever covered the hole had worked recently enough that the cement smell lingered in the air beneath the rain. Ethan crouched beside it and touched the surface lightly. Wet, less than an hour old. A courthouse maintenance crew would never pour concrete in the middle of the night during a storm. Not for a small hole beside the stairs. Unless someone wanted something hidden immediately. A sudden metallic sound echoed faintly from somewhere behind the building. Ethan stood at once. One sharp clank, then silence again. He moved carefully along the courthouse wall toward the rear parking lot, where fog drifted thick between old maple trees. The farther he walked, the quieter the town became until only distant rainwater dripping from gutters remained. Then he saw it. A sheriff department cruiser parked crooked behind the courthouse loading entrance with the driver door hanging slightly open. Empty. The engine cold. Deputy Aaron Lyle's unit number was painted across the side. Ethan slowed. Rex suddenly barked once from inside the truck across the street. Loud. Urgent. Ethan turned instinctively toward the sound. And that was when he noticed movement inside the courthouse basement window beside the loading dock. Someone passed quickly behind the glass, carrying a flashlight. Ethan approached slowly, every instinct sharpening now. The basement windows sat chest-high above the ground, fogged slightly from inside heat. Through the haze, he could make out rows of shelves and old filing boxes beneath dim fluorescent lights. Then the flashlight beam stopped moving. Ethan leaned closer to the glass. Empty room. But resting on the metal table, near the back wall, sat a small pink backpack covered in cartoon butterflies. Mud stained one strap heavily near the zipper. Ethan recognized it immediately from the missing child posters hanging all over town. Madeline Pierce's backpack. His pulse slammed hard once inside his chest. "Jesus," he whispered. Another sound came from behind him. Footsteps crunching softly across wet gravel. Ethan turned fast. Deputy Aaron Lyle stood near the edge of the loading area beneath a flickering security light, soaked from the rain and breathing hard as though he had been running. The young deputy looked pale, terrified. His uniform shirt was wrinkled beneath his sheriff jacket, and his trembling hands kept glancing back toward the courthouse entrance behind him. "You should not be here," Aaron whispered urgently. Ethan stepped toward him immediately. "What is going on?" The deputy swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the basement window. "They know your dog found the necklace." "Who knows?" Aaron looked toward the darkness surrounding the courthouse before answering. "People you do not want looking at you." Ethan stared at him carefully. "Was that your badge on my porch?" Aaron nodded once. "I tried taking evidence to the state police 2 days ago." His voice cracked slightly beneath the rain. "Sheriff Nolan found out before I could leave town." Rex barked again across the street. Louder this time. desperate. Then all at once, every light inside the courthouse went dark. Darkness swallowed the courthouse so completely it felt as though the building itself had stopped breathing. One moment fluorescent lights glowed behind basement windows. The next, everything vanished into black. Even the hum of electricity disappeared. Only rain and wind remained. Deputy Aaron Lal stepped backward immediately, panic flashing across his face. "We need to leave," he whispered sharply. "Right now." Ethan barely had time to respond before Rex exploded into barking across the street. Not warning barks this time. Command barks. Urgent. Protective. Ethan turned toward the truck just as headlights suddenly ignited at the far end of the alley behind the courthouse. A dark SUV rolled slowly through the fog without police markings, engine low and steady like a predator moving through brush. Aaron's face drained pale. "They found me." Ethan grabbed the deputy's arm instantly and pulled him behind the sheriff cruiser parked beside the loading dock. Rainwater dripped from the underside of the vehicle onto cracked pavement while the SUV continued crawling closer through the mist. Its headlights remained off now, leaving only the faint outline of chrome visible between sheets of rain. Rex barked louder. Then Ethan heard another sound beneath the storm. Footsteps inside the courthouse basement. Slow. Measured. More than one person. Aaron's breathing became uneven beside him. "I tried copying files from evidence storage," he whispered. "Children reported missing over 15 years. Some never even made state databases." Ethan looked at him sharply. "What files?" "Transport logs. Sealed witness statements. Names connected to judges, deputies, foster homes." Aaron swallowed hard. Every time someone asked questions, records disappeared. The SUV stopped roughly 20 yards away. Engine idling. No doors opened. No movement. Just silent pressure sitting in the fog. Ethan glanced toward the basement window again. Dark now, but he could still picture the pink butterfly backpack sitting on that metal table inside. Madeline was here recently. Maybe still alive. The thought hit him like cold steel through the ribs. Rex suddenly stopped barking. Complete silence. Ethan knew that silence too. Combat silence. The kind that came seconds before danger moved. Then the German shepherd burst from the truck across the street and sprinted directly toward the courthouse entrance instead of the alley. "Rex," Ethan hissed. The dog ignored him completely. Mud splashed beneath powerful paws as Rex disappeared around the front corner of the building. A loud metallic bang echoed somewhere inside moments later. Aaron looked terrified now. "Your dog found something." Ethan made the decision instantly. "Stay low." He sprinted toward the courthouse front steps while rain lashed sideways through the square. The heavy wooden courthouse doors stood partially open now, swaying gently against darkness inside. Ethan slowed near the entrance. Old instincts returned immediately. Clear corners. Listen first. Move second. Inside, the courthouse smelled of wet dust, old paper, and cold marble floors untouched by daylight warmth. Emergency exit lights glowed faint red along hallways, casting long shadows across framed portraits of retired judges lining the walls. Somewhere deeper inside the building, Rex barked again. Ethan followed the sound past empty courtrooms and silent clerk offices until he reached the main central hall beneath the staircase. There, Rex stood rigid beside a bronze memorial plaque mounted on the wall. The dog was pawing furiously at the marble floor beneath it. Ethan approached carefully and swept his flashlight beam downward. Fresh scrape marks covered the tiles near the baseboard. Something heavy had been moved recently. Rex whined sharply and pressed his nose against the wall itself. Ethan crouched lower. Then he saw it. Hidden between decorative wood panels beside the memorial plaque sat a small silver keypad almost invisible beneath shadow. Numbers worn from repeated use. Before Ethan could react, footsteps echoed slowly from the second-floor balcony above him. Calm. Unhurried. Ethan looked up. Sheriff Daniel Nolan stood at the railing in darkness, hands resting lightly on polished wood while rain rattled softly against courthouse windows behind him. "You always were stubborn, Marine," Nolan said quietly. "And that dog of yours." His eyes shifted toward Rex. "He remembers too much." Rain rolled down the courthouse windows behind Sheriff Daniel Nolan in slow silver lines, while thunder murmured somewhere beyond the hills. He stood above Ethan like a man completely comfortable in darkness. Calm. Patient. The kind of patience that only came from believing control had already been won. Rex remained planted beside the hidden keypad beneath the memorial wall, fur bristling along his spine as a low warning rumble echoed through the empty courthouse hall. Nolan's eyes never left the dog. "You know what the problem with military dogs is?" the sheriff asked quietly. "People think they only remember commands." Ethan kept one hand near the flashlight clipped to his belt while his eyes tracked every exit around the room. "What does this open?" he asked, nodding toward the keypad. Nolan smiled faintly. "Old maintenance tunnels. Building was constructed in 1932. Half this town sits on forgotten infrastructure." His voice echoed softly across marble floors. "You should leave this alone." Rex barked sharply. One bark. Hard. Nolan's expression shifted almost invisibly at the sound. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like hearing an old wound reopen. Ethan noticed it immediately. "He knows you," Ethan said slowly. Nolan rested both hands against the balcony railing. "Years ago, overseas, your unit passed through a holding site outside Basra." Ethan felt cold settle behind his ribs. Iraq. Dust storms. Cargo yards. Shipping containers baking beneath 115-degree heat. Memories he spent years trying to bury. Nolan continued, speaking softly. "Your dog was different back then. Smart enough to smell things nobody wanted discovered." Rex's growl deepened instantly. Ethan's pulse tightened. Fragments flickered through his mind now. A temporary detention compound near the border. Contractors. Missing paperwork. Rex barking uncontrollably outside a locked freight container before military officers pulled Ethan away and ordered the area cleared. Ethan had not thought about that night in almost a decade. "You were there," Ethan said quietly. Nolan nodded once. "Private security liaison at the time." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sheriff's face for half a second. Tired eyes. Deep lines. Regret hidden somewhere beneath the composure. "Some secrets should stay buried, son." Before Ethan could answer, footsteps echoed suddenly from the rear hallway behind him. Fast. Multiple people. Rex spun instantly toward the sound. Nolan looked down over the railing one last time. "You need to decide who you trust very carefully." Then the sheriff stepped backward into darkness and disappeared from sight. Ethan moved immediately toward the staircase, but a loud metallic slam echoed through the building as steel security doors suddenly crashed shut across both corridor entrances. Emergency lights flickered red overhead. Somewhere nearby, Aaron shouted in panic. "Ethan!" The voice cut off abruptly beneath echoing footsteps. Rex sprinted toward the rear hallway at once. Ethan followed fast through flashing emergency light until they reached the loading corridor near the basement stairs. Empty now. Aaron was gone. Only his deputy radio remained on the floor beside scattered rainwater and muddy footprints leading downstairs. Ethan grabbed the radio quickly. Static hissed through the speaker. Then Aaron's voice burst through, weak and shaking. "They are taking her through the tunnels." Static swallowed the rest. Ethan looked toward the basement stairwell, disappearing into darkness below. Rex already stood at the top step, rigid and focused. Waiting. Ethan clicked the radio desperately. "Aaron, who is they?" Only Static answered. Then another voice came through instead. Calm. Familiar. "Sheriff Nolan. You still have time to walk away, Marine." The transmission crackled softly beneath distant thunder. "But if you keep following that dog tonight, you're going to find out what really happened to your wife." Silence hit Ethan harder than the storm outside ever could. For one long second, the courthouse seemed to stop breathing around him. Rachel. Her face surfaced instantly in his mind. Warm eyes. Winter scarf. The sound of her laugh in the kitchen before everything shattered 3 years earlier in what police called a highway accident during heavy rain. Ethan slowly lowered the radio while Rex stared into the darkness below the courthouse, waiting for him to follow. The basement stairwell descended beneath the courthouse like the throat of something ancient and hungry. Concrete walls sweated cold moisture beneath dim red emergency lights, while water dripped steadily from rusted pipes overhead. Rex moved first without hesitation, powerful shoulders cutting through darkness as his nails clicked sharply against cement steps. Ethan followed close behind with flashlight raised, every muscle tight beneath the weight of Nolan's final words. "What really happened to your wife?" The sentence echoed through his mind louder than the storm above them. Rachel's accident had happened 3 years earlier on Highway 9 during heavy rain less than 10 miles outside Black Hollow. The sheriff department claimed her car lost traction near Miller's Bridge and slid into the ravine below. Ethan had believed it because grief leaves people desperate for simple explanations. But now something colder was beginning to crawl through those memories. Something unfinished. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel opened into a narrow underground corridor lined with old steam pipes and electrical conduits humming softly in the dark. The air smelled of wet stone, bleach, and something metallic hidden beneath it all. Rex slowed suddenly beside a faded yellow line painted across the floor. He sniffed once, then looked back toward Ethan with tense alertness. Ethan swept the flashlight downward. Fresh wheel marks crossed the concrete. Heavy cartwheels. Recent. They led deeper into the tunnel system beneath the courthouse. Somewhere ahead, a metal door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the underground passageways like distant thunder. Ethan broke into a faster pace immediately. "Aaron." His voice bounced back at him from damp walls. No answer. Only the steady hum of old ventilation fanned somewhere beyond the darkness. The tunnel curved sharply left after another 50 yards, opening into a larger chamber beneath the courthouse foundation. Ethan stopped cold the moment his flashlight beam swept across the room. Filing cabinets. Hundreds of them. Old steel drawers stacked wall to wall beneath hanging fluorescent fixtures. Boxes labeled with years. Missing persons. Juvenile intake. Witness relocation. Foster transfer. Dust covered most of the shelves, but several cabinets stood partially open with folders scattered across the floor as though someone had searched them in a hurry. Rex moved toward one cabinet immediately, nose low, tail rigid. Ethan approached carefully and pulled open the nearest drawer. Inside sat rows of sealed case files tied with red evidence tape. Most carried handwritten status stamps across the front. Closed. Lost. Transferred. Deceased. Ethan's flashlight stopped on one file near the back. Rachel Hale. His chest tightened instantly. He pulled the folder free with trembling hands. Rainwater from his jacket dripped onto the paper as he opened it slowly beneath the light. Inside sat photographs from Rachel's accident scene. Highway shoulder. Crushed guardrail. Her overturned car below the ravine. Standard police documentation. Except for one photograph near the bottom. Ethan froze staring at it. Tire tracks. Not one set. Two. Another vehicle had stopped beside Rachel's car moments before the crash. The second set of tracks had been carefully cropped out of every official report Ethan ever received. Rex growled low beside another cabinet across the room. Ethan turned quickly. The shepherd had stopped near a vent opening hidden low along the far wall. Air drifted softly through the grate, carrying faint voices from somewhere deeper underground. One voice belonged unmistakably to Sheriff Nolan. Calm. Controlled. Cannot keep moving her forever. Another voice answered quietly. Female. Terrified. Young. Ethan felt his pulse hammer once. Madeline. Rex barked sharply and pawed at the vent cover. Ethan knelt beside him immediately. The screws holding the grate in place looked recently removed and replaced. Hidden access point. Before Ethan could touch it, a trembling voice echoed from the tunnel behind them. Do not open that. Ethan spun around. Deputy Aaron Lyle stood near the chamber entrance, breathing heavily, face pale beneath flickering fluorescent light. His right hand clutched a small silver keycard. If they hear you down here, Aaron whispered, none of us are getting out alive. Deputy Aaron Lyle looked like a man who had not slept in days. Dark circles sat beneath bloodshot eyes, and rainwater still clung to his sheriff jacket in damp streaks as he stepped cautiously into the underground records chamber. Rex remained planted beside the vent opening, staring at Aaron without trust. The young deputy noticed immediately. Your dog knows, he whispered quietly. Ethan rose slowly from beside the cabinet, holding Rachel's file. Knows what? Aaron swallowed hard before answering. That I waited too long. Silence filled the room except for the distant hum of air moving through old courthouse vents. Ethan held Rachel's accident file tightly in one hand, while his flashlight beam trembled faintly across rows of forgotten records. Start talking, he said. Aaron nodded once and moved toward the chamber door, checking the tunnel behind him before lowering his voice. Sheriff Nolan built a private transport system years ago through abandoned county tunnels. Officially, they were emergency maintenance routes beneath the courthouse and old church district. He glanced toward the vent beside Rex. Unofficially, Nobody asked questions about what moved through them at night. Ethan felt cold anger tightening slowly beneath his ribs. Children. Aaron closed his eyes briefly. Runaways. Foster transfers. Missing persons nobody thought would be searched for long. His voice cracked under the weight of the words. Most got moved across state lines before paperwork even reached databases. Rex growled softly beside the vent as though the dog understood every sentence. Ethan stepped closer. And Rachel? Aaron looked down immediately. That answer hurt before it even arrived. She found financial records connected to the Courthouse Foundation 2 months before her accident, Aaron whispered. She started asking questions about sealed juvenile files. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. Why did nobody tell me this? Aaron gave a hollow laugh that sounded closer to defeat than humor. Because around here Nolan is the law. Judges owe him favors. Deputies owe him careers. Half this town believes he personally saved Black Hollow after the mills shut down. His eyes lifted toward Ethan again. People protect the stories that make them feel safe. Somewhere beyond the vent, a metal door slammed faintly underground. Rex barked once and immediately pressed closer to the grate. The frightened young female voice echoed again through the ventilation shaft. Closer now. Ethan's pulse surged. Madeline was alive. Aaron quickly held up the silver keycard in his shaking hand. This opens the lower security gate beneath the church annex. Ethan frowned. Church annex. Tunnel connects under St. Matthew's Chapel 3 blocks east. Aaron glanced nervously toward the corridor. That is where they stage transports. Ethan stared at him carefully. Why help me now? Aaron looked exhausted suddenly. Older than 26. Because yesterday I watched Sheriff Nolan tell Madeline Pierce everything would be okay while she cried for her mother. His voice broke almost completely. And I realized monsters do not always sound angry. Silence settled heavily across the underground chamber. Ethan looked down at Rachel's accident photographs again. 2 sets of tire tracks hidden from every report. Years of lies compressed into one terrible realization. Rex suddenly snapped his head toward the tunnel entrance behind them. Ears high. Alert. Footsteps. Slow and approaching. Aaron heard them too. Panic flashed across his face instantly. They are coming. Ethan shut Rachel's file quickly and clipped his flashlight off. Darkness swallowed the room except for dim fluorescent flickers overhead. The approaching footsteps echoed steadily now through concrete tunnels. More than one person. Calm. Organized. Aaron backed toward the vent wall beside Rex while gripping the keycard tightly enough his knuckles whitened. Then another sound drifted faintly through the ventilation shaft beneath them. A child crying softly. Ethan looked down at the vent again. Rex pawed urgently at the grate. The dog's breathing had changed now. Focused. Determined. The same way he sounded before combat extractions overseas. Ethan knelt beside him without hesitation and grabbed the rusted vent cover with both hands. Help me open this. Aaron froze. Fear flooded his face completely. If we go down there. Ethan looked at him sharply. Then we finally stop running. And somewhere deep below the courthouse, Sheriff Nolan's voice echoed calmly through the tunnels like a man already waiting for them to arrive. The vent cover groaned loudly as Ethan and Aaron pulled it free from the wall. Rust cracked loose onto the concrete floor while cold air rushed upward from the darkness below, carrying the smell of damp stone, bleach, and something older buried beneath years of silence. Rex moved first without hesitation. The German shepherd slipped through the narrow opening and disappeared into the shaft below with the confidence of an animal following instinct stronger than fear. Ethan climbed in after him, flashlight clenched between his teeth, while Aaron followed more slowly behind. The tunnel beneath the vent was barely wide enough to crawl through comfortably. Old concrete scraped against Ethan's shoulders as they moved downward through darkness illuminated only by weak flashlight beams cutting across dripping pipes and rusted support bars. Somewhere ahead, Rex barked once. Sharp. Focused. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger underground passage beneath the courthouse foundations. Ethan dropped quietly onto wet concrete and immediately scanned the corridor around him. Brick walls. Old electrical wiring. Iron doors spaced every 30 feet beneath flickering utility lights. Some of the doors carried faded county markings almost erased by time. Archive storage. Maintenance access. Flood control. But one door near the far end looked newer than the others. Reinforced steel. Electronic keypad. Fresh scratches near the handle. Rex stood directly in front of it, growling low. Aaron landed beside Ethan with a shaky breath. "This is the lower holding corridor," he whispered. "Transport teams use the church entrance above ground." Ethan looked toward the reinforced door. Behind it, muffled voices drifted faintly through the metal. One voice belonged to Sheriff Nolan. Calm as ever. Another sounded younger. Nervous. Then came the soft sound of someone crying quietly. "Madeline." Ethan stepped toward the door immediately, but Aaron grabbed his arm hard. "Wait." Ethan turned sharply. Aaron pointed toward the ceiling corner above them. Tiny red light blinking softly in darkness. "Camera." "They know we are here already," Aaron whispered. Before Ethan could respond, the steel door buzzed loudly and unlocked itself with a heavy mechanical click. The hallway fell silent. Even Madeline's crying stopped. Slowly, the reinforced door swung inward on its own. Warm yellow light spilled across the tunnel floor from the room beyond. Sheriff Nolan stood inside waiting for them. No weapon in his hands. No deputies beside him. Just the old sheriff beneath soft overhead light, wearing the same rain-soaked coat from earlier that night. Behind him sat a small underground office lined with shelves of records and computer monitors glowing pale blue in darkness. Madeline Pierce sat wrapped in a blanket near the back wall beside an older woman wearing nurse scrubs. Frightened but unharmed. Ethan froze for half a second at the sight of the child alive. Rex immediately pushed past Nolan toward Madeline, sniffing carefully before relaxing slightly beside her chair. The little girl buried trembling fingers into the thick fur around his neck. Nolan watched quietly. "You see," he said softly, "nobody here wants children hurt." Ethan's voice hardened instantly. "Then why hide them underground?" Nolan looked tired suddenly. Older than before. Because the system above ground already failed them. Rainwater dripped steadily from his coat onto the concrete floor as he spoke. Foster abuse. Trafficking rings. Courts too overloaded to care. He gestured toward shelves packed with sealed files. Half these children disappeared because nobody important bothered searching long enough. Aaron stared at him in disbelief. "That does not justify kidnapping them." Nolan's eyes shifted toward the deputy with visible disappointment. "You still think law and justice are the same thing." Ethan stepped closer now, anger rising beneath years of buried grief. "And Rachel?" The sheriff went silent. For the first time that night, real pain crossed his face. "Your wife found the tunnels," Nolan answered quietly. "She wanted to expose everything publicly." Ethan's pulse thundered inside his chest. "You killed her." Nolan shook his head immediately. "No," his voice lowered almost to a whisper. "But someone else panicked when she refused to stay quiet." Silence filled the underground office. Then one of the computer monitors suddenly flickered. A security feed appeared on screen showing courthouse deputies moving quickly through the upper tunnels toward their location. Nolan saw it instantly. His face changed. "Damn it!" Rex growled sharply beside Madeline, while the sheriff looked back toward Ethan with something that almost resembled fear. "You do not understand," Nolan whispered. "The people coming down here are not trying to protect me." The security monitor flickered violently as shadowed figures moved through the upper tunnels carrying flashlights that swept across concrete walls in nervous white beams. Sheriff Nolan stared at the screen with growing tension beneath his calm exterior, while rainwater continued dripping from the hem of his coat onto the underground floor. "They were never supposed to know about this room," he said quietly. Ethan kept himself between Madeline and the doorway instinctively while Rex stood pressed against the frightened little girl's chair, ears forward and muscles tight. The older nurse beside Madeline looked terrified now, clutching a silver cross necklace in trembling fingers. Aaron stepped closer to the sheriff. "Who are they?" Nolan hesitated. For the first time all night, he looked less like a lawman and more like a tired old soldier cornered by ghosts. "Private contractors," he answered finally. "The same people connected to the Iraq transport sites years ago." Ethan felt cold realization settle through him immediately. Shipping containers. Missing detainees. Sealed records. Men without uniforms doing work nobody wanted traced back to official agencies. Rex suddenly barked sharply toward the monitors. One camera feed now showed 3 men entering the lower tunnel corridor wearing dark rain jackets without sheriff insignias. Their movements were too controlled, too disciplined. One of them carried a compact black case. Another held a suppressed flashlight mounted beside his shoulder. Ethan recognized the posture instantly. Professionals. Nolan moved toward one of the computer terminals quickly and typed a command with shaking hands. There is still evidence stored on these drives, he said. Financial records. Transport logs. Names. He looked directly at Ethan now. Rachel copied some of it before she died. Ethan's chest tightened hard. Where is it? Nolan reached slowly beneath the desk and pulled out a small weatherproof hard drive wrapped in faded evidence tape. The label across it read Case Archive, R-17. She hid this before the crash, Nolan whispered. I kept it because I thought someday somebody honest might survive long enough to use it. Aaron stared at the sheriff in disbelief. Then why stay part of this? Nolan looked toward the dark monitor screens for several seconds before answering. Because once you realize how deep evil reaches, you stop believing you can beat it from outside. A loud metallic crash echoed suddenly from the tunnel corridor beyond the steel door. Somebody was forcing entry. Madeline gasped softly beneath her blanket while Rex moved instantly in front of her, body low and protective. Ethan grabbed the hard drive from Nolan's hand. There has to be another exit. Nolan nodded toward the rear storage wall. Maintenance tunnel behind the archive shelves leads under St. Matthew's Chapel. Another crash thundered through the corridor. Closer now. Dust drifted from the ceiling pipes overhead. Aaron hurried toward the shelving units while Ethan helped the nurse lift Madeline carefully to her feet. The little girl clung tightly to Rex's fur with shaking hands. Is the dog coming with us? She whispered. Ethan looked down at Rex. He is not leaving you. For one brief second, the child smiled despite the fear surrounding them. Then the steel office door burst inward hard enough to slam against the concrete wall. 3 dark figures entered the room beneath flashing flashlight beams. No badges. No uniforms. Just cold silence and steady movements. Ethan pulled Madeline behind him immediately while Aaron froze near the archive shelves. Sheriff Nolan stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The girl leaves tonight, he said firmly. This ends here. One of the men removed a small earpiece slowly and studied Nolan with detached disappointment. You were told to contain the situation. His voice carried no anger. Somehow that made it worse. Rex growled low beside Madeline. The nearest man's eyes shifted toward the dog immediately. Recognition flickered across his face. That shepherd was at Basra, he murmured quietly. Ethan's blood ran cold. The man stepped closer beneath flickering overhead lights, studying Rex carefully. I remember this dog. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Your wife remembered too much. Silence hit the underground room like winter settling over a graveyard. The underground room fell into a silence so heavy even the dripping pipes seemed afraid to break it. Ethan stood frozen beside Madeline while the hard drive pressed cold against his palm inside his jacket pocket. Across the room, the man from the tunnel watched him with emotionless eyes that carried years of hidden graves behind them. Rex remained between the strangers and the child, body low, amber eyes locked forward with unwavering focus. The German shepherd did not bark now. He simply stood his ground. Sheriff Nolan slowly stepped in front of the group again, shoulders tense beneath his soaked coat. The girl leaves, he repeated quietly. And so do they. The 3 men exchanged brief glances beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Then the oldest among them sighed, almost sadly. Daniel, he said softly, you were never supposed to grow a conscience. Nolan's jaw tightened. Neither was Rachel Hale. Ethan felt the words hit harder than any weapon ever could. The room seemed colder suddenly. Smaller. Madeline clutched Rex tighter beneath her blanket, while the nurse whispered trembling prayers under her breath near the archive shelves. Aaron stood motionless beside the hidden maintenance door, silver keycard shaking in his hand. One of the men took a slow step forward. Your wife discovered financial transfers connected to overseas relocation contracts, he said calmly to Ethan. She thought exposing them would save people. His eyes lowered briefly. Good people usually believe truth matters more than power. Ethan stared at him without blinking. You caused the crash. The man did not answer immediately. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled across Black Hollow again like distant artillery. Finally he spoke. Fear causes most tragedies. Not evil. Rex growled low at the sound of his voice. The man glanced toward the dog with faint recognition. That shepherd nearly exposed our Basra operation 10 years ago. His expression darkened slightly. Animals remember patterns humans train themselves to ignore. Sheriff Nolan suddenly moved sideways toward the security console mounted beside the desk. Quick, decisive. Before anyone reacted, he slammed his palm against a red emergency switch hidden beneath the terminal. Instantly, warning alarms erupted through the underground tunnels. Red emergency lights flooded the chamber, while steel security gates thundered down somewhere deep inside the courthouse foundations. The three men turned sharply in surprise. Nolan looked directly at Ethan. Maintenance tunnel. Now. Everything exploded into motion at once. Aaron swiped the silver keycard through the hidden panel beside the archive shelves while the nurse hurried Madeline toward the opening behind the records wall. Rex stayed glued to the child's side every second. The oldest contractor stepped forward fast, voice suddenly sharp. Stop them. But Sheriff Nolan blocked the path between them. For one brief moment, Ethan saw not a sheriff standing there, but an exhausted old man finally choosing which side of his soul he could still live with. Nolan looked back toward Ethan one last time. Rachel died trying to protect children nobody else would fight for, he said quietly. Do not waste what she uncovered. Then the emergency lights flickered violently as another security gate crashed down between the chamber and the outer corridor. Aaron pulled the maintenance door fully open. Cold night air rushed into the underground passage from somewhere beyond St. Matthew's Chapel. Ethan guided Madeline through first while the nurse followed close behind. Rex moved beside them instantly. Behind Ethan, alarms echoed through the tunnels alongside shouting voices and heavy footsteps growing more distant beneath the falling steel barriers. Ethan paused only once before entering the escape tunnel completely. He looked back toward Sheriff Nolan standing alone beneath flashing red lights inside the underground archive room. The old sheriff gave the smallest nod imaginable. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just acceptance. Then the maintenance door slammed shut between them. Darkness swallowed the tunnel ahead while cold dawn air drifted through the narrow passage carrying the scent of rain and pine from the sleeping town above. Madeline's small hand tightened around Rex's fur as they moved forward together through the dark. By the time they emerged beneath St. Matthew's Chapel, dawn had begun spilling pale blue light across Black Hollow. Rain still drifted softly through the pine trees surrounding the old stone church, but the storm itself was finally dying somewhere beyond the mountains. The hidden tunnel exit opened behind rusted boiler pipes beneath the chapel basement, and cold morning air rushed over Ethan's face like the first real breath after years underwater. Madeline stayed close beside Rex as they climbed the narrow staircase toward ground level. The little girl had not let go of the German Shepherd once since leaving the underground tunnels. Somehow the dog's steady presence anchored her against the fear still trembling inside her small hands. Upstairs, church bells began ringing 6 slow notes into the morning fog. Peaceful sounds. Ordinary sounds. The kind people trust without realizing how much darkness can exist quietly beneath them. Aaron pushed open the rear chapel door carefully and scanned the empty street outside. No sirens. No deputies. Only wet pavement glistening beneath dawn light and rows of silent storefronts beginning to wake for another day. State police are 40 minutes out, he whispered. I sent everything from Nolan's archive servers before the alarms triggered. Ethan nodded once while slipping Rachel's hard drive deeper into his jacket pocket. Proof. At last something solid enough to survive the lies. The nurse wrapped a blanket tighter around Madeline's shoulders before kneeling carefully in front of her. Your mother is coming, she whispered gently. The little girl's lip trembled slightly. What about the sheriff? Silence followed the question. Ethan looked back toward the courthouse rising above town through drifting fog. From here it appeared almost beautiful in the weak morning light. Old brick glowing gold. American flag lifting softly in cold wind. Nobody looking at it now would ever guess what secrets lived beneath those foundations. Rex suddenly sat down beside Ethan and leaned his heavy head quietly against the Marine's leg. The simple weight of the dog there nearly broke something open inside him. Because for 3 years Ethan Hale believed grief was a locked room with no exit. Rachel gone. Truth buried. Life reduced to silence and survival. Yet somehow this dog kept digging anyway. Through mud. Through lies. Through the parts of Ethan himself that had stopped believing justice still existed anywhere in the world. Aaron's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He answered quickly, listened for several seconds, then lowered it with stunned eyes. Sheriff Nolan is dead, he whispered. Heart attack during transport upstairs. The words settled heavily into the cold chapel air. No triumph came with them. No relief. Only exhaustion. Ethan looked down at Rex again. The dog remained still beside him, amber eyes fixed quietly toward the distant courthouse, as though understanding something humans never fully could. Sometimes guilt kills a man long before death arrives. A car suddenly turned onto the church road at the far end of the block. Madeline gasped softly the moment she recognized it. Her mother burst from the passenger side before the vehicle even stopped completely, running through rainwater and morning fog toward the chapel steps with tears already falling down her face. Madeline ran to meet her instantly. The reunion happened beneath ringing church bells and drifting pine mist while Rex watched silently beside Ethan. No words could fully carry that kind of relief. A child returning home. A mother collapsing to her knees holding someone she thought she lost forever. Even the nurse wiped tears quietly from her eyes. Ethan stood apart from the moment near the chapel railing, shoulders heavy beneath the fading storm. Then he felt Rex press closer beside him again. Loyal, steady, alive. Ethan knelt slowly and rested one hand against the shepherd's rain-damp neck. You never stopped searching, he whispered. Rex looked at him calmly, breathing soft clouds into the cold mountain morning. Somewhere beyond the fog, sunlight finally broke through the clouds above Black Hollow, touching the church windows in pale gold. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not feel alone standing in the light.